Man, let me tell you, I have been sitting here talking to the audience for 5 minutes, and I am just realizing now, I'm just realizing now that my mic was muted. Here's the problem when you go live alone and you don't want to wait around. And I vented about the hockey team, which I'm glad no one heard. I turned that game off long ago and was preparing for the show actually. And then just spoke a little bit about the show emotionally resonating with me in ways that I probably never foreseen, like prior to even season one. And I thought I had done a good job of expressing myself. Whoops. How about not at all? Maybe wish I could have that one back. How you doing, buddy?
Not too bad. Yeah. Finished up Dynamite, and we're getting into Anarchy in the Arena match for Double or Nothing. So they just announced it.
You know, I seen a shot of the crowd from I think last week's show,
Mm-hmm.
and I could not believe how empty a small arena is. And this is not to take shots. I don't understand. Like, it's hard for me to go like tipping my hat here. You already know, but some of the audience doesn't know because I don't like to get into it on airtime. But like, if I'm going to go to a live event, I am signing up to be in pain. There's just no matter what I do, it's going to be painful. So there better be some enjoyment. If AEW came around here, they wouldn't because I live in the middle of nowhere. Shocked that GCW came around here. But I think AEW tickets are fairly affordable, and I don't get it, man. Like, hey, at the end of the day, they got their TV money, they got sponsors, they're good, but like now we're talking about small venues being half empty, and I don't understand it. I'm not the biggest AEW guy, but I think that when you look at the last half a year specifically, I think they've made massive strides forward. I know this is an Andor review, people. I'm going to make sure I timestamp this. But I don't get it, man. It's just I don't get why people aren't going out. So, like, it's got to be discouraging. You can have the biggest TV deal you want, but it's got to be discouraging to a guy like Will Ospreay goes out there and the arena is 60% empty. These are top of the line athletes who put their bodies on the line, maybe more than they should at times, and give you entertaining matches. You can be the biggest AEW hater you want, but the match quality is unmatched by anyone, in my opinion. And yeah, I don't get it. I don't understand.
Well, I think part of it is ticket prices. Sounds like it's not just affecting AEW. WWE had the issue, like they had to reduce prices for the tickets for WrestleMania because people just weren't buying them.
That's a little bit different though than an episode of Collision or Dynamite.
Right, but it sounds like in general for all companies, I guess ticket prices have gone up some, and it's based on what a news article I read earlier, that it's not just like one or two companies. Like ticket prices in general have gone up, and people just aren't going to shows as much as they used to. So, and given, like, you're right, when you have like WWE and Netflix, they're getting their Netflix money, and AEW is getting their Warner Brothers Discovery money. It now it feels like all there is they're trying to create moments versus and relying on social media to really kind of put stuff out there and kind of have that big buzzworthy moment versus what we had growing up as kids. AEW started doing that, but now that trends are changing and things just kind of seem like they're heading into that type of direction where you have social influencers like Logan Paul who are kind of shines a light on everything and gets some views and things like that. Um, that's kind of a trend. I kind of hope it doesn't keep going that way, but you know,
Agreed.
if let's just hope Kenny Omega is wrong when he says in a few years we're going to have a WrestleMania main event with Logan Paul and Mr. Beast. Okay, let's put it that way.
Kenny should worry more about his own product than what's going on over there, in my opinion. So,
well, I
uh,
think he was thinking as a whole because I don't, but it was just a recent
they
interview.
run the entertainment industry now, right?
Yeah.
They, like, couldn't tell you the name of the guy that got speared out of his boots at the Rumble. Never heard of him.
Oh, I Show Speed. Yeah, it was a hell of a spear though. I'm not going to lie, but yeah, that just didn't make sense to me. But whatever it is for views and clicks, and that seems to be kind of what's driving everything nowadays.
Yeah, the almighty dollar, right? I think that's always driven things, just presented in a different way now. But without further ado, let's get into this. Um, the host of the show is here. I apologize for that 5 minutes of silence. I thought my mic was on. That's fucking embarrassing. Um,
Or maybe was divine intervention because of what you were ranting and raving about. Who knows?
yeah, maybe, but I'll say it now when everybody can hear me. If you can afford to go to a Leaf playoff game, that means you can afford to throw Matthews and Marner jerseys on the ice. And I just commend the people that are doing that because someone's got to hold two fraudulent cowards accountable. And Johnny will get this reference, and the rest of the audience who watches this after the fact won't. Randy won't. But I said to my cousin tonight, um, and like it's not just like a spur of the moment thing. And I think Johnny will tell you this. Him and I don't watch a ton of hockey together anymore, but we talk a little bit. And like I've been on the Matthews and Marner thing for a while. I have a certain, to me, in professional sports, when the game is on the line, you are getting paid way more money than you deserve to be paid to play a sport. Your ass should be putting your body on the line to go get a result. And the two highest paid players on the Leafs who claim to be the best, who constantly say, whenever there's any sort of criticism that come at them during the media, and this is my biggest problem with them because you didn't see Sundin or Gilmore or Clark or whoever back in the day go on about this, is whenever they're asked about the fan response, what do you think about what's being said about you out there? Their response is, we don't care about the noise. Cool. You don't care that the fan base who pays out the ass for tickets and writes your check essentially. You don't care about their opinion on the team or the fact that you can't go to the net. They are the biggest frauds since a parent that used to bring their kid to the school Johnny and I went to had a Green Bay Packers jacket on and used to claim he played for the Green Bay Packers just because he had a Green Bay Packers jacket on. They are bigger frauds than that guy. I've had the passion sucked out of me the last few years. I don't scream at my TV anymore. I don't, punch something in anger. I turned the game off at 2-0. At 2-0. Because at 2-0, I knew what was coming just by the way they were playing. It's not lucky. You knew. You fucking knew. And it's like, wow. So, honestly, I'll always love the franchise the same way I would expect Johnny to continue to love the Green Bay Packers. Randy, I don't know any of your teams, but the way that you love your sports teams. But when they're led by players that constantly take zero accountability, constantly never leave money on the table, constantly tell you that they don't care about what the fan base thinks, guess what? There's a reason why jerseys are being thrown on the ice and the series isn't even over yet. We have re-entered Phaneuf and Kessler, but worse. And they deserve every little bit that they get. I hope 34 wakes up and demands a trade because I'm assuming no one's going to fucking have the balls to do it themselves. And I hope 16 ends up somewhere else because they don't need it. That is what I said while I was muted. Now that I'm not muted, let's get to it. Star Wars Andor, episodes 10 through 12. Here we go. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. That's my intro. Go ahead, Johnny.
That was
Was more impressive than the least performance tonight, and that's pretty hard considering how terrible that sounded.
I don't know about that.
Buddy, you could put skates on and
Oh, I'm not talking about their performance.
find your way. I've seen you skate, pal. And
I'm not talking about their performance, buddy.
well, that's how bad they were. Is I could see you finding a way to at least get to the front of the net, even if you had to fucking crawl. Anyway,
All right, let's get this show properly underway. So let me start this by saying greetings from the galaxy far, far away. This is the Fandom Nation Andor Season 2 review for the final 3 episodes, 10, 11, and 12. Boy, do we got a lot to go over, a lot to unpack in those final 3 episodes. So let's get right down to it. I don't think we necessarily need to do the normal intros since we've been here for a while. Sean's been ranting for the last 10 minutes. You know him. He's down there.
My mood's not bad. That's when you know it's getting bad. I'm in an okay mood.
And over here to my camera.
Wait, was that my intro?
Right?
Is that?
Yeah, that's your intro.
Okay.
You've been ranting for 10 minutes. The
All
fans
right.
don't need to say your name anymore. Joining me over here on my right, Randy, how are you doing tonight? You haven't had a chance to speak yet. So how are you doing tonight?
That's a lie. He spoke. He spoke.
No, I'm doing good. I obviously the Leafs game didn't go your guys' way from what I'm understanding, because I was too busy watching Dynamite. So it's but I'm good. Watched all 3 episodes today, so it's relatively fresh in my mind, and yeah, there is definitely a lot to unpack.
That is putting it mildly. I also watched them this afternoon. Exchanged messages back and forth with Sean. I had a great
after a terrible workday.
apparently had some thoughts that were identical to Jade's watching the episode, which apparently seemed to catch Sean completely off guard based on the reaction. It was all caps, OMG. Apparently the two of us are both excited for the possibility of a CSI Star Wars series after the investigation portions from the ISB investigation. But we'll get to that a little later. But I'm just glad to know I'm not the only one who would enjoy CSISB. So let's get right down to it. Let's start, obviously, episode 10. Typically, if you've watched our reviews of the Andor so far, you'll know that we sort of break things down a little differently. So today, for this particular block of 3, we're going to do it a bit more traditionally, sort of progressing through the episodes versus, where we'd focus on a location or a specific storyline and go from there. We are going to break it down a bit more in depth. This time, in part because it's the last 3 episodes. We don't really, there's nothing more after this. So we gotta get down into the weeds, break it down, and then there's a lot to talk about. So we're going to start this off, obviously, with the episode 10, obviously. We're going to start at the beginning. Luthen and Clea and their, the final meeting with Lonnie and what would come to be, the final words between the two of them. Throughout the course of all that, what were you thinking? What were you feeling? What were your thoughts? Randy, we'll start with you.
So at first I wasn't thinking it was going to be like, kind of the end all be all for Luthen, but I'm going to start with this as saying it's about damn time we just had an episode that solely focused on them, because they've been a part of the entire series, but we never really got any meat and potatoes about either character. We just kind of saw their development through the series, and we really didn't have any idea of their reasoning behind anything. We just knew they were doing what they were doing. This gave us a nice, I wouldn't say in depth, but it gave us enough of a look behind the curtain for both characters, through the flashbacks, showing just like their motivations and how they've had to change their persona just to become who they were. And honestly, I did not see that coming. I thought it was going to be something different for both characters. But when you kind of look at it, it's really interesting is the parallels for them. You look at like Marva and Cassian, where she finds him and technically adopts him and raises him. And that's kind of, so I think that's part of the reason why Luthen had a thing for Cassian, because he was very similar, in a lot of ways to Clava. So it's like, it was real interesting that we had that parallel. But ultimately, looking at this episode, the emotions, like if you kind of look at the subtext of just like Luthen knew, like he knew it was his time, and everything he did, everything he said pointed to that. And as much as we all know we didn't want it to happen, we knew it was going to happen. And it was done and of course, like I said last night, I wanted him to go out in a blaze of glory. And that didn't happen. But what did happen was still no less powerful of a way for someone to end up having to go out and hit on an emotional level that I wasn't prepared for, because it was just one of those where we got the foreshadowing in season 1 where he knew he was not going to live to see the light of day for when the rebels finally win the day. And it's, yeah, I kind of got emotional watching that, just because I didn't want to believe that that's how he was going to go out. But ultimately it just hit on all the right cylinders. So it hit everything that it needed to hit for that type of episode.
Well, yeah, you jumped about 10 different points on the notes there, buddy.
Well, you'd say my thoughts and impressions of the episode, so I went for it.
I specified that scene, like their last words and
I didn't. Did I actually
and
their last words? No, I did not. I just
I
hit
don't
on
even
them.
think you touched on them.
It's
No, I didn't.
It's more so we're beginning with the Luthen and Clea prepping to meet Lonnie, and then really the Lonnie scene can be included too.
Yeah.
I may just throw my 2 cents in there. Yeah, I think Randy's right. Luthen knew time's up. I think he knew a year ago when he says to Cassian, and someone please remind me that before we go off, it's not the place to bring this up, but there is one glaring issue that these three there's a mistake anyways in these episodes that needs to be brought up, and we'll bring that up at the end. Someone please remind me so I don't forget. It's pretty vital because we're probably going to clip it out. I think when he said, we'll take care of that last week in episode 9 with the burning the bridges, like, yeah, and then we found out that he's been, they've been on to him for about a year. The telling Clea to move. Obviously we get more of that later on, but he's like, move, and she moves. And we're almost all out of perfect. I think we're just about out of perfect. And even the meeting with Lonnie, like, I've seen a lot of people pouring their heart out for Lonnie, and he does deserve credit because without Lonnie, the Rebel Alliance doesn't do it. But can we not confuse Lonnie's backstory here? There's people that definitely take just a small segment of episodes. They're probably thinking of episode 6 this season, and then the most recent batch, and maybe projecting something on Lonnie that's not there. Lonnie is not a Rebel sympathizer. Lonnie was well aware of what a lot of, the happenings around the Empire were, and was totally okay with it. Lonnie was being blackmailed. Okay. Not that that's right, by the way. I mean, in this case, kind of is, but let's not start to make Lonnie out to be a martyr, because he's not. And I don't know what he thought was going to happen when he gave that information. He should have known better. He either, if he wanted to live that badly, then he should have ratted them, or just run himself. Because the second he passed that along to Luthen, like, it was never a question. The second Luthen says Yavin, I was like, well, that's it. Lonnie's dead. Like, there's no way that Lonnie can ever return back to work after Luthen revealing Yavin. And just so beautifully done, guys. Like, it's, and we're just talking about like the first two scenes essentially, and the weight is there. Like, do you remember last night I said, and I think we were all in agreement, that it was going to be really hard to follow up, specifically 8 and 9, but we'll see the batch of episodes 7, 8, and 9 and be anywhere close to that. So my expectations were already low. I didn't think it was going to be bad. I thought it was going to be really good, and I thought that there was a good chance they'd stick the landing. Now, I'm not saying it's the quality of 8 and 9, but 10 specifically is not that far off. And they get right into it right out of the gate. Like, there's no time to breathe in this episode. The only time you're breathing is during the flashbacks, and even then you're intrigued on how the relationship develops. So, just a moving experience, Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. It was, you knew pretty quickly in that, conversation with Luthen and Clea in the shop that this is it for them. You know that. You get that feeling, that emotion, and I figured that out pretty quick, that this is it. This is the end, especially when he sort of, I don't want to say sacrifice stuff, when he's the one who chooses to stay behind, to burn it. That's when he knows this is it. He knows that whoever stays behind to do that is not getting out of it, and he does not want that to be her. Now, at the time, we didn't quite know why. We had our thoughts, we had our suspicions, but we didn't quite understand the relationship between the two until we get to the flashbacks a little later in the episode. But you knew, at least I felt very quickly, that he knew whoever does this is not coming out of this alive, and makes the ultimate sacrifice in the end to stay behind so that she can escape and continue, and so that she can see the sunset, the sunrise. And it was a great moment. It was beautiful. And I think the Lonnie part of this story, you got to see a bit more of the man behind the curtain. Like, you're right, Lonnie was not, he wasn't the rebel hero some people have tried to paint him to be. He wasn't that. He started out as someone who didn't want to, like, if you go back to the season 1 scenes and look at them again, he doesn't want to be there. He doesn't want to do it. He wants no part of it. He's being forced to do it by Luthen. And I think somewhere along the way, maybe even as recently as the Gorman massacre itself, he has bought in and realized, shit, they're right, we're wrong, and I need to do something about it. I can help. I can do something. And that's when he goes, and get Dedra's credentials and holds on to them and knows that when the time comes, I'll, it makes his decision once Mon Mothma outs the Senate and everything kind of goes haywire there. That's when he chooses to act. So, you knew that it was chaos and calamity and bad things were going to happen. And I think to a point, until he gave the info that he did, like, I think if he had something less, something that wasn't as earth-shattering, he might have had a chance to survive. And I don't know. Once Luthen gave up Yavin, you knew that this could go either way. Either he's going to give something that has a future and they need him, or that's it. That's it. And he gives
to me,
him,
the
he gives up the
giveaway
Death
is what he
Star.
said the week before to Cass, right? Like, he says, no Yavin for me. I'm going to die here. Obviously, Lonnie doesn't hear that conversation.
No. But I mean, like, it's one of those, like, I think once Luthen realized what this was, how big this was, he knew that the Empire would scorch the galaxy to keep that under hat. They proved that in Rogue One when Tarkin literally blows up the data center, just to keep it under wraps, to try and keep the Death Star plans. He blows up an entire, one of the most top secret Imperial facilities out there just to try and keep that information contained. That I don't think there's a chance at that point Luthen realizes just how serious this is and knows that the only way this train stops is with you dead. I'm sorry, but your time has come. That's it. You're dying here. That's when he made that decision. I felt bad for him, for Lonnie, when he starts talking about his family and his daughter and his wife. It's like, yeah, things are not going to be good for them. Now, granted, it seems like later on in the course of the episode, I don't want to say is vindicated, but, it seems like a lot of the heat doesn't fall on him like we would expect it to. Now, I'm sure to say, his wife and daughter are definitely being spied on every step of their lives from now until the fall of the Empire, but, it could have been a lot worse.
It's funny that you brought up the Death Star, because the way that you just mentioned that, it dawned on me. It's like the first time we got wind of the Death Star, if you remember, is Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. The Geonosians are the ones partially behind the blueprint, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Not just Krennic. And so, like, we're going back in terms of timeline now. That would be about 21 years ago at this rate. It feels like it'd be longer than that, but no, it's about 21 years ago. So imagine for 2 decades. And then the plans to have it start
might even be more than that.
Would have been longer.
When they were doing like the Gorman meetings back in the beginning of this season, which at this point would have been 5-6 years ago, they were already talking about the Death Star, like the 2-decade operation.
Yeah, so like the initial plans would have had, like, because it's not like the initial plan was the Geonosians. They already had what this thing was going to look like then. So, like, you're going back probably sometime, probably
25,
around
30 years. Yeah.
After Phantom Menace is my guess, when Scythe Diaz bites the bullet. Like, so this is, let's just say you're right, quarter of a century. You build something for quarter of a century. This
thing that big
planet, this moon-sized space station, this planet-killing space station, you put 25 years of secrecy, of endless credits, of kyber crystals and all sorts of technologies and issues that come up into this thing. And in about a week or two, it's blown up. They're bigger chokers than the Maple Leafs.
By one
when you put
small
it that
fighter.
way, when you put it that
Guess
way,
what?
yeah,
Star 2 doesn't go all that much more successful.
Yeah, when you put it that way, I guess you don't think of it in quite those terms, right? You don't put the timeline together. They've been working on this thing for as long as they have, and then from the time they get the plans to the time they actually blow it up is nothing. It's less than a year. It's months. It's weeks. It's
not even. It's about 2 weeks. It's about like 2 weeks at most, which is something.
I'm going from like the time we first learn, like when they first start getting suspicions to
when
they actually blow it up. I'm talking like
one getting the plans.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 weeks, like just.
I just it's when you put it that way, like when you start actually looking at that, it's like, oh wow, that's bad. Like that. I mean, I still can't believe they kept it quiet for as long as they did.
We need like an animated short, just an animated short. And I know Robot Chicken has the one, but like an actual animated short of Palpatine finding out that the Death Star was blown up a week or two after it's 100% constructed.
What the hell is an aluminum falcon?
Yeah. You smell like burnt, leathery, wrapped bacon.
It's
bigger chokers than the Maple Leafs, and that's hard to do, people.
It does jive with things they say later on about holding on to their power and what have you. But we'll get to that as we go on. But let's jump to the next one. We've covered that part, so let's move to the next big moment, and that is, I'm gonna go ahead and quote a director, and Dedra choking on her aspirations, because that's exactly what she did.
That ambitious
What do you
bitch.
know? The Empire chokes again.
Which is funny because she's the only one who actually succeeded
Yeah,
and then failed in her success.
in just horrible fashion.
Obviously she figures it out. Luthen is Axis, and instead of going to the person who's in charge of the Axis investigation, goes on her own solo with a skeleton crew, no pun intended, to arrest the guy that they believe is single-handedly, destroying ammunition dumps and stealing, like, goes after this top FBI's number one most wanted guy, and she goes after him with a small team, solo, without ISB,
Told to
without
drop it.
anybody. But let's talk about that conversation with Dedra and Luthen inside the shop. When Luthen takes the mask off, Dedra gets to see. Dedra finally meets the Wizard of Oz, goes behind the curtain and takes the mask off. What were you thinking? Did it play out the way you wanted it to? Did you wish there was? Like, how was it for you? Sean, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, this is where I get to reveal. You two already know because we talked about it today, but this is part of what was spoiled for me. I'd seen the screenshot of Dedra holding the blaster pointing at Luthen. It was one picture after another like that. So I didn't know if he was going to get plugged or not, but it still basically gives away his final conscious moments, right? So pissed me off a little bit. Maybe took a little bit away from me, but like the play that's going on in that shop as it's happening, both people playing their roles. She could have just went in there and fucking did it, and maybe she would have accomplished something, but no, she had to bask in her glory. She had to be the fascist pig that she is, and she went in there and like it's they're role playing, both of them. And
Not in the fun way.
and I love
Man.
and I love Luthen's there's two items or two things in this shop that we don't know about their authenticity. And like I laughed and looked at Jade. I'm like, he's not talking about an item in the shop, he's talking about the two of them.
You actually sent me that screenshot specifically, and I pulled it up in our chat. At the moment, only 2 pieces of questionable provenance in the gallery.
Just incredible. Just boss move by Luthen. At the end of the day, did he go about things the wrong way at times? Perhaps. And it's hard to get into it all because some of that doesn't really come to light till episodes 11 and 12 through Clea's words. But without Luthen, there's no rebellion. He really gets it started. Look at how many pieces are his in the Rebel Alliance. A lot of, just a lot of work done by him, whether it made him a bad guy or not. That's, up to the viewer. But just like, even in the end, she has him right there. The building's surrounded. All you need to do is tap it in. You just got to tap it in. Give it a little tap-tap-a-roo. And then Dedra chokes because Luthen wins and gets his way. And he dies. And I know it's not a blaze of glory, but there wasn't a way. There was no way out for him to take a popular line from season 1. And he knew it, as we talked about with the last scene. And he stabs himself. And the fear, kudos to, I think the actress's name's Denise Goff. The look on her face and the response when he stabs himself and falls is just a tremendous piece of acting, gentlemen. It was a great scene. I, I know people that like it even more than I do. I just think the fact that I was spoiled about some of it maybe took a little bit of enjoyment out of it for me.
I can certainly see why. I also figured out this episode where I knew her from, and had been bugging me for the last 2 seasons. She was Yennefer in The Witcher 3. So I've known her voice the entire time, and it's been tickling me in the back of my brain.
Say, that is not from the show.
No, the voice. It's just like tickling me in the back of my mind. Like, why do I know this voice? And today it came to me because it was part of a headline for an interview she gave after the series. So that's how I finally figured it out. But yeah, she was Yennefer in The Witcher 3. Randy, what about you? What were you, you kind of touched on it a little bit during your episode spanning discussion earlier.
Well, not give you more specific, I suppose. But yeah, this scene was the whole cat and mouse thing, which from basically the entire the series, having them go back and basically her doing everything she could to find him, on top of essentially burning her own bridges because of the fact that she wanted to do everything she could to find him, regardless of whose toes she stepped on. And she made the common villain mistake. She just sat there and monologued the entire time, like why she's essentially why she's won, quote unquote, and she screwed up and she knows it, and we got to see that reaction. But like ultimately, just the back and forth was so well done. I was kind of bummed. I mean, I was bummed to a degree in the sense of what Luthen chose to do, but also I understood the reasoning behind it. It's one of those where the secrets are dying with me. You're not going to get a chance to torture me. You're not going to get a chance to use anything on me. Everything I know, everything I am, it all dies with me, and you get nothing. We could say, "Good day, sir." We could pull a Willy Wonka on this, and just you get nothing. And that look of horror on her face was everything she worked for, and it slipped right through her fingers. And she knew if they couldn't revive him, Lord only knows what was going to happen to her, as we eventually saw exactly what happened to her. I think that's still too good for her, but that's my opinion, and we'll get into that later. But it was just so well done. How quickly he dropped the facade. It was just like, you know what? Yeah, it's basically you can't contain this. You've already lost. It's slipped through your fingers, and now it's out all over the world, all over the universe. And he's not wrong, because we all know
galaxy waiting to disgust you.
Yep, that's the quote.
But I mean, he's not wrong. We've seen the effects of that because of the original trilogy alone. Mm-hmm. And just to put all the pieces together and to just be like, no matter, kind of, you could sit there and do even Braveheart, you'll never take our freedom. You can take my body, you can take my spirit, but you never take our freedom. And that's kind of basically what it was. That's kind of like how, when you really look at it, that's what it was in the end. Is doesn't matter what you do to me. My work is done. And that in and of itself was just, that alone was powerful. Obviously more transpires after, but that's even got a more of an emotional response out of me. But this right here, just understanding just everything that transpired in that short amount of time. I mean, that's, no matter what you do, I've won. Plain and simple. And I think that's great. I think that's a very good way for Luthen to die, is like, I've won regardless of what you do. And in a way, that's really the truth.
I've seen some people put out there, and I don't want to spend too much time on this just because we got to get moving. There's so much to get to, but Luthen wouldn't have talked. Luthen wouldn't have talked. It's like, have you not paid attention to season 1 of Andor, 2, A New Hope? Like, the Imperials have ways technological ways of making you talk, scientific ways of making you talk, and unless you are
Without that, they have the Inquisitors.
that too, and like, well, actually, no. At this point, there might be none left.
Well, look at the technology they used on
But
Bix. But then,
but
of course, you have
exactly,
the interrogator droid that they used
and
on Leia.
and they were stunned that Leia didn't give anything up, and why? Well, little did they know she's force sensitive. And even though, we throw out the possibility of Luthen being a Jedi, that didn't come out to be. And he probably would have, even if he didn't mean to. So it did add, to me, weight to the rest of the episode. Yeah.
That sort of brings me, like, you guys have covered the gambit here, and I don't really have too much to add to that other than to say the only part of this that bugged me is that Luthen should have known better than to stab himself in the gut. Like, yes, it's messy, it's intense, and survival rate is low, but it's still there, especially in this environment of Star Wars where that they're going to have a medical team there. That they have the technology to keep you alive, to interrogate you. That I feel like Luthen would have, like, I understand, like, don't get me wrong, like, I understand, like, well, we got to keep the rating down. We can't be too graphic. So, like, I can understand storytelling wise that they didn't want to push that, like, this wasn't the hill to die on sort of thing. But, like, for me, I feel like the way they've built Luthen up this entire time, he would have slit his throat. He would have cut himself, he would have given himself the necktie.
So about that, Tony Gilroy talked about this actually today.
Okay.
And it's scientifically impossible to slit your own throat. You cannot do it. But he could have jammed it through his throat.
Yeah, but sure. That's what I mean, though. Like this,
But like, you mentioned it, that now we're going a little bit high on the rating. You would have to have the blood just.
Oh yeah, I understand. I understand it from like the
one point I think you have here is where I think would have been more effective, but I guess they needed Deidre to live, so it's plot armor, right? Not really though. Like, considering where she goes,
I kind of see the direction you're heading, and I would have liked that
blow
myself.
it up, right? Why didn't he have charges?
Yeah, that too. Actually, but no,
he's using them for everything else.
there was a part of me that kind of hoped they'd get into a scuffle, and that's how he'd end up with the blade. Like, he'd pull the blade, they'd scuffle a little, and he'd end up with it.
BRB guys got to switch devices.
Like, I thought that was a possibility and sort of what they were building to, but like, I think the fact they didn't actually show it either way, other than when he fell, you could just as easily have had him stab himself in the neck. Because I think that's the only thing that, you're not going to take me alive is the thing that it's like, stab yourself in the gut. There's still a good chance that they can keep you alive long enough for the advanced medical technology they have to keep him alive, to interrogate him. And we know they have that. But I mean, for God's sakes, they're keeping Anakin alive in that suit, after being literally, every limb cut off and melted his skin off and boiled his blood. And, like, if you can keep Anakin alive after that, stabbing yourself in the gut, that's like stubbing your toe in the modern real world era, So
I mean, if it was a bigger blade, if it was a bigger blade, I would have been like, "Hey, look, he's committing seppuku."
Yeah, like, it just, that's the only, like, part that I don't want to say took issue with, because I understood it, even, like Sean said, they didn't, you can't physically do it. It's like, you have other options. You stab yourself in the gut, you can stab yourself in the neck, you can stab yourself in the throat. There are options. And let's not even throw out poison. I feel like Luthen would have been a guy who had a poison capsule in his tooth. Like, that's another possibility. So, like, there are definitely options. And from a storytelling perspective, I can kind of understand it, because I don't want to say you need, but what comes next sort of solidifies the Clea relationship. So, I can sort of understand that from a storytelling perspective, but that's the only part that happened really throughout the course where I was like, yeah, but why? This doesn't, this isn't what he would have done. But this of course leads to, the end of Dedra's story, which we come to see where she ends up as the scapegoat for everything that happened in this episode. She ends up, we come to see where she ends up, and we'll cover that a little later. But you know, she's the one who ends up in cuffs and arrested and interrogated by Krennic in the next episode. But let's move on to the next part of this. Obviously, we've speculated, we've discussed, we've theorized, we've plotted, we've ployed, we've planned for what exactly the relationship between Luthen and Clea was. And throughout a series of, 5, 6 flashbacks throughout the course of this episode, we get to see their relationship, where it started, what it was, how they interacted with each other, and we get a chance to see their backstory play out over the course of this episode. So in the flashbacks, was there anything that sort of surprised either of you, that caught you, at like, whoa, okay, this is that you didn't sort of expect from their story and how their interactions were as youngins?
So I think one of the things that came to light that I was never considering before, and I was able to get to a point where I could squash it ultimately, but at least for a chunk of that episode, and even some people are still believing it could be the case, but I think there's too much evidence that goes against it. But in the moment between the little girl that they cast to play Clea, okay, Randy kind of talked about this already, and I was worried he was going to steal my thunder. And I'm glad to know after watching a few reactions today that I'm not the only one that came to this conclusion. Jade came to the same one too. Well, not conclusion, but at least thought it was possible. Was just like, oh shit, Clea could be Cass's sister, because if you remember, all the way back in season 1, when pick up at episode 3, the first watch party we did together. Okay, and Luthen's talking to Bix, and he mentions where, we assume Bix tells him, but he mentions Cass, as Andor, and where he's from. And it was like, oh. And considering what apparently happened to all the kids there and what's going on with Luthen in that first flashback scene, I was like, man, there's a legit possibility that they're brother and sister. And I know that's making the universe small, but it doesn't help that the young actress they cast as her resembles the actress that played Cass's sister. And knowing that it was a couple years in between filming, it's like, oh shit, it's a possibility. But ultimately, how I squashed it was, and actually, there's a moment in the final episode that I'll just bring up now briefly, where there's a transition that implies there could be more there, but I think it's just a bait and switch by them, not in like a bad manner. But for me, at the end of the day, if you remember, Cass's sister calls him Cassa. To me, it would be a little too convenient for Clea to not be like, oh, well, Cassian, and both from the same planet, and she would have known where he was from because Luthen knew, unless Luthen would have kept them both in the dark. But yeah, I ended up squashing it. But there's some lags there, but ultimately, I don't think it ended up becoming anything. And just the flashbacks in general, I thought they were well done. Unique dynamic relationship, surrogate father and daughter. And it was nice seeing Naboo again very, very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were supposed to infer that Clea was Luthen, Luthen, that Clea was Cassian's sister. Like, I think that was supposed to be what we took from that, and what we, that was the implication. So
Good to know I'm
I
not
think,
alone.
oh yeah, for sure. Thinking it was definitely what we were supposed to do, I think. I think the point for me where I was like, well, no, that's not, obviously that's no longer true. If no other time was, you kind of mentioned it when we get to when we get to episode 12, when they have the moment in the safe house and there's no, realization or, recognize, because I don't recall those two being face to face for long periods of time prior to that in the series. So like, you might have
The
like seen
last batch of
flashes of
episodes, that'd be about it.
yeah. So like, if there was a moment where we get that realization of, oh shit, you're my sister, you're my brother, like if we get that moment, it would have been then. And once that didn't happen, I just sort of like, okay, well, obviously they're not, because it's I think that's too important a moment for someone as detail oriented as Tony Gilroy to leave on the table and not do if they were, brother and sister.
I do wonder if
So
that's something they discussed, and ultimately, like, Tony's very wants to do his own thing, wants to be original.
yeah,
I do wonder if he goes, well, that's too on the nose with Luke and Leia.
yeah, yeah. That's entirely possible.
I mean, her name's already Clea, for God's sake, right? So,
I mean, I said this to you. I think I said it last night on the show that I'd read people on Twitter and Reddit who were trying to make the case that Clea was Leia. Like,
oh God, definitely a
no,
resemblance, but no.
yeah, it was stupid because for one, we knew Leia was in the Junior Senate at this point, at different points throughout the course of the series, and you know we can account for Leia's whereabouts through pretty much the entire course of the series to know that it'd be impossible for her to be a shopkeeper's assistant on Coruscant that's secretly a rebel cell. Like, come on, people needed to give their head a shake on that one. But yeah, you're right. It was nice seeing places like Naboo. Obviously, that one was pretty obvious. I feel like I recognized the second one, but I don't know which planet it was supposed to be. That was the firing squad one, where Clea sort of realized what was at stake and realized the oppression and all of that a bit more deeply than most people her age should ever. But like, I don't know why. Like, to me, I sort of honestly I felt like that was Jedha. I don't know if that was just me or if it was just sort of the way that the fact that it was mentioned so many times, but it sort of had that look and feel of like Middle East style that you see on Jeddah when we see it in Rogue One. So I don't know if that's just me.
Could have been Onderon, especially with Saw
Yeah,
Gerrera being in the show. That has that same vibe too.
yeah, that's also a possibility. So like, I don't know. I think that was when I asked you if I'd missed them actually name dropping the planets during the flashbacks, but the only one we really got was so we've covered the flashbacks. Let's move on. At the end,
Just so we're clear to answer Dustin's question, that was Radis. Radis is in Rogue One.
yeah,
So it
I
wasn't
think
like it was a new-
I think that a lot of us, at least off the rip, thought, "Oh, that's Akbar," and then eventually you realize that it's not. But so let's move on. Let's move on to the big part of this episode, which is obviously Clea going all Sam Fisher, John Wick, whoever your agent of choice is, infiltrating the hospital to end the life of her father. I'm gonna start with this one, me, because I'm the host. I can do that. It just, I loved the way it worked. Sort of interspersed with the flashbacks and seeing the strategy tie in together and all of that, and it. I loved it because it did sort of quench that action jive that was sort of missing from that episode. Added that in a nice way to sort of work her in there and get her there and do it. And I I would have liked a more recognizable alien species that she was carting around there. I said it to Sean. I would have liked that to have been an ET, just for the cameo lols, since we know they serve in the Senate after, was it episode 2 we saw them in the Senate?
Episode 1. Episode 1.
Was that really? Oh, didn't think it was that early. But anyway, we know they serve in the Senate, so it would have been. I would have enjoyed that, but you get to see her working. You actually get to see her get her hands dirty, which is something we hadn't really seen to this point, and I loved it. I thought it was great. The way she seamlessly did the wet work, setting off the explosion, and you could see the emotions playing out in her, leading to her getting to the room and being the one to end Luthen, almost in defiance of him. Because I don't think he would have wanted, not necessarily wanted to do that, but he told her to go, and she didn't. Which was sort of the perfect wrapping up of their relationship. One final disobeying order moment to have the final goodbye was great. It was on the nose. I enjoyed everything about it. Getting that little taste of action in and amongst an otherwise pure story episode. I liked it because it wasn't overbearing. It wasn't excessive. It was very surgical, I guess is the word I'm looking for, in how she operated to get to Luthen and take out the agents and a couple stormtroopers. I thought it was great. It was. I think it was what it needed to be. You still got the emotion when she got to the room, which was something I was afraid of. I was afraid of that extra layer of emotion either not hitting the way it should have, and yet it hit perfectly for me anyway. What about you, Randy? How did the hospital, this, all that?
I mean, I felt like really the only thing missing was the Mission Impossible theme. But literally, we knew she was a strong woman. We knew she was dependable. But this was really the first time we got to see her be a total badass. And it's something that we all knew was possible. And we got to see it firsthand. And it was done so well that, it was like we went from Star Wars to spy thriller. And I thought that was really cool. But in the end, her being the one to pull the plug, essentially, that, it was hard. It was hard to watch, but but that's what it was meant to be. It was not meant to be something easy to watch, because when you think about Luthen in general as a character you've grown to know, to like through 2 seasons, and it's always those types of characters, the ones that you root for, the ones you want to know more about, the ones you want to just kind of delve into their mind and kind of see what really makes them tick. Those are the types of characters that usually hit the hardest when they go. And this was one of those moments where you felt the same exact emotion she was feeling, of having to do what she knew needed to be done to not only, take care of what needed to be taken care of on Coruscant, but to protect the rebels themselves. And that the weight of that was definitely weighing on her the entire time, having to do that. And it was acted out beautifully. The music hit just right. The emotions hit just right. And yeah, it's not the blaze of glory I was hoping for Luthen, but it was a fitting end for a special character who kind of pretty much stole the show for the most part for quite a long time.
Sean, what about you?
Well, I mean, it's not hard to tell Tony Gilroy did the Bourne movies. Um, with how the hospital sequence turned out. Um, it's also important to remember that Lucy didn't tell Clea to leave. He told Clea to wait for him. They were going to meet somewhere, and she ends up going back to the shop. So she still disobeys him. But if Luthen would have known he wasn't going to, bleed out and die right away, and he was going to be put on life support, I absolutely think he would have wanted Clea to come and do that. I think that is a fair conclusion to draw. Um, and the puppet thing, it was nice to have some comedy added in there very briefly to lighten it up a bit, because I mentioned like episode 8, episode 9, episode 10, like they're all so damn heavy, right? That it's like it was nice just to be able to chuckle a little bit. Obviously, K2 adds some of that too, but um, it was wonderfully done, and she's a badass. Um, and the final moments are touching. The tear, the kiss to the forehead, and she has to get out. I don't think it was ever a. She was never going to rescue him. Not that she wouldn't have wanted to, but by that point, he's too far gone. He needs to be hooked up to the machines. You're not. There's no other way out of there. She's going to kill him, and that's rough. But it was the right thing to do. And he's my favorite character in the show, and that was it was bummed to say goodbye to him episode 10. Would have liked him to last an episode or two longer, but given how the episodes were put together, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. It sums up the episode perfectly. So let's move on. Unless either of you have anything you want to add for episode 10.
No, other than I
No,
got to eat
good.
some crow. I didn't think 10 could even come close to following up 8 and 9, and I think they did about as good a job as he could have expected. Although I won't lie, the two things that stood out about episode 10, I was like, oh, Cassian's not in this episode. Johnny's going to hate it. Oh, there's a piss or a handgun as a blaster. Johnny's going to hate it. But it sounds like you really liked it, man, and I'm happy.
They were all sufficiently Star Warsy to my taste. There was no moment where I'm looking like at a Star Wars blaster and being like, "Oh, that's actually a blank, 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 blank."
Hey, that's a Glock. That's not a blaster.
Exactly. Nothing like that. And no, and Cassian not being in this episode actually was a good thing, if I'm being honest.
No, we needed this type of episode.
Yeah, I think
Not
he
gonna
would have
lie.
bogged it down a little much, where this episode sort of answered all of the Luthen and Clea questions that we kind of had that had built up over the course of the 2 seasons. That not having Cassian was perfectly acceptable. Felt like we needed it. Would I have liked these answers earlier? A little, yeah. I'm not. I won't lie and say that waiting until now was what I would have preferred, but it worked. They stuck the landing perfectly. It was a last week's balance where the perfect performance on the beam. This 10 was the dismount, and it was perfect. It was a perfect dismount. They stuck the landing quite nicely. So let's move on to episode 11. We're going to get right down into the weeds here, and we're going to start right off. We sort of touched on it a little bit. We got Dedra got what was coming to her in this episode, in the interrogation with Krennic. Can I just say, Krennic, Ben Mendelsohn shoves. He gives the quote he gave in there. Are you a rebel spy? If you aren't, you missed your calling. Was one of the greatest insults I have ever heard on Imperial utter. And if I'm being honest, that's one thing Star Wars has always been very good at. That broke me, made me laugh so damn hard throughout that. So Krennic's interrogation of Dedra, was it all that you hoped it would be, Sean?
I don't have the exact line here, but I want to say when he first of all, he does this thing early on in the interrogation where he puts the one knuckle of his finger on top of her head. Like he's definitely inserting dominance. And then at the end of the interrogation, I agree with your point about the line for sure. But he like grabs her on each side of her face and says something to the equivalent of, we'll just have to try to go on without you. As like he's telling her, like, you're not that important. You have this over inflated self importance that you've given yourself. And, kind of fitting because how poor Cyril died the week before, for her to get a taste of that herself was nice. I know we're jumping a little bit ahead here, but I just want to say this is really the last tangible thing for her, other than the brief meetup with her former
the
number
end
two,
montage.
and the end montage, obviously. But like, I don't think, knowing in Palpatine's empire, knowing the errors that she caused, that there isn't a chance he's not executing her. Palpatine does not believe in letting you live in prison. If you had done something that bad, she would have been executed, and that's one thing I will say. I think they missed the boat on a little bit, but
I
yeah,
think that's more in the
just
timing than anything else.
Palpatine's probably fucking doing more of his voodoo magic at this time, right? Like he's so. Like people are always like, "Where's Palpatine? Where's Palpatine? Why wasn't he in the Senate? Why didn't we see it?" Because he's not actively there. He's still in touch with certain higher ups, but like he's off doing his own fucking thing, trying to figure out how to live forever. His life is declining.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more of a, she's sent to the work camp where, Cassian was, obviously, and she'd, get like a year and then they'd kill her. Once everyone's forgotten about her, then they execute her. That seems more like their plan. Brandy, what about you?
Mendelsohn was great. That interrogation scene. That I was just like, yeah, this is what you get, bitch. And honestly, I was kind of waiting for him to pull out a blaster and execute him himself. But since it didn't happen, yeah, I still say what she ended up with was too good for her. She definitely did enough, and I'll say the character was well written and acted well enough that I despised this character by the end. I absolutely wanted to see her get punished for. And the thing is it's the Empire. It's like I shouldn't be going, yes, please do it. I want this done now. No, it was, but that's kind of how I felt after everything she'd done, after every toe she stepped on, after overstepping her bounds and just being just relentless in her pursuit and doing whatever it took to get her way. And as much as, obviously it did yield some results, the big thing here is that in terms of the eyes of the Empire, she screwed the pooch and she didn't deserve to live. But, we all know where she ends up because of the montage. And you're probably right, Johnny. Probably in a year or so, when everybody's forgotten about her and her will is broken, they'll finally put an end to her suffering. But
I don't, at this point in my mind, actually, I kind of hope that we get like a book series that's basically the Star Wars equivalent of the Trials of Nuremberg, with Dedra on trial for the Gorman massacre. I'd love to see that personally. I think that would be a very interesting read.
And
Mon Mothma's the judge happens post Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and given how much of a smear campaign the Empire loves to throw out there, it's not out of the realm of possibilities of them doing that for her, pointing the fingers at her and making her basically the gunman. So yeah, I can see that happening.
I think the timing of it is more that she ends up forgotten in the prison. And I know we're jumping ahead to obviously, finding her in the prison in the montage at the end, but I think that, once the Death Star gets blown up and all that, because we don't know the time, we sort of presume based on other things going on in the montage that we're, well after the events of Rogue One, which obviously puts us in the post Battle of Yavin era, to say that I think she just gets forgotten there until the New Republic comes in, and and they start releasing people to realize who she is, and whether it's Mon Mothma or somebody else realizes who she is, and they put her on trial for her actions. And the I've served in a prison for however long isn't the excuse for the actions you did. Um, but I digress. We're fantasy booking at this point, so let's move on.
Actually, hang on before we move on. I
Yeah.
just want to give a shout out to Dustin, whose comment is I don't see us getting a better comment during the show. He pulled a Bane. Do you feel in charge? Which is Bane's line, obviously, in The Dark Knight Rises. But the hilarious part about that is Bane says the line to Ben Mendelsohn.
Yep.
That's awesome. I don't know if he knew I'm assuming Dustin knew that already, but if he didn't, like that's poetic. Great comment, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, and to the point Jerry made there, that seeing a flash forward with Dedra working on the Death Star, I did think that was a possibility. I thought that might be where we see her in the presumptive sort of flash forward at the end. She gets assigned to the Death Star as a good job, but we all know that she's actually about to get blown up. But I much prefer the ending she actually got, because it is much more poetic in nature. I don't think we'll ever get that sort of recasting of actors playing other characters. I don't think that's a road we'll go down ever in Star Wars. Especially not seeing as how the reluctance to recast legacy characters tells me that I don't think they'd ever do that, if we're being honest. If you played a character of consequence, that's it. You've had your shot in Star Wars. You're not getting somebody else.
Yeah, and the only reason they recasted Bail Organa is simply because of scheduling. It's not because Jimmy Smits didn't want to come back. They didn't want to recast, but ultimately there was no choice and he was needed in the story.
I mean, Benjamin Bratt said that, I think it was mentioned in an interview I think he did with Variety, I think, after the batch of episodes where he debuted. They talked about how they tried to work the schedule out, but Jimmy was too busy working. What did I say? It was East New York, I think, was his network series at the time. So they just couldn't make the schedule work, and that's the nature of television, and entertainment. Contracts are contracts,
Yeah.
and
One last shout out to Benjamin Bratt, though, who I thought I didn't know how I'd feel about Bale being recast, but he was great. What's next?
I was good as soon as I saw who it was, because I'm a huge fan of Ben Bratt, just like I'm a huge fan of Jimmy Smits. So let's move to, obviously, we see it in Rogue One. I don't think we really need to go too in depth on this particular point, because we'll probably be talking about it a lot next week when we do the Rogue One rewatch. But Cass and K2 and their dynamic.
We finally got some
different?
levity.
Did it feel different than the movie? Or was it pretty much, sort of that nostalgia? This is just how I remember it. Because for me, it was this is just how I remember it.
Yeah.
K2 is snarky asshole. Yeah, that's about right.
Yeah, I think that's pretty valid. And Cass is clearly taking shots at him too, and it's important at this point. They've already been together a year, right? So like, we do skip that initial, getting to know one another phase, but like Alan Tudyk's an absolute gem. And I was listening to Tony Gilroy explain why. I think I sent Johnny a message about this earlier. Why they couldn't have more K2?
Yeah,
was simply because we've seen what those droids were capable of on Gorman, and this story becomes a lot less interesting if you have Superman droid helping you get through every mission with ease that we see on screen. So even though we didn't get too much of him, I thought we got just enough, and just another superb job by Alan Tudyk, and the chemistry that the two of them have, Alan Tudyk and Diego Luna.
Yeah, I mean, you see the relationship. I loved the bowl. I loved the. I don't even know what game it was. In Star Wars was just weird because usually we know all of the games, but whatever game they were playing off the rip there, the Dominoes esque games they were playing with Cassian and K2 and
Right.
I'm drawing a blank on his name.
So Melchi, I think it was.
Yeah, Melchi. I love seeing that mostly because I love the mini games in Star Wars. Everything from Pazak to everything else we play in Star Wars. It was nice to see a new game. But yeah, their relationship it's exactly how we remembered it. It was taking that old sweater out of the closet that you haven't worn in a few years and putting it on and realizing it still fits perfectly and you remember why you loved wearing it in the first place. Let's move on to the next point. You're gonna have to refresh me specifically what you're referring to. Clea playing the waiting game?
So she's sent out the call for help, right?
Okay, yeah.
And she has to sit there in that safe house knowing they could be tracking her down, knowing no one's answering on the other line. Like, that's, as someone who really struggles with anxiety, especially post heart attack, that is, you know, um, like so much tension and anxiety, and you can tell it's getting to her. And I just thought it was very well done.
Yeah. I think you're right. It was definitely, you got a lot of, emotion in that, seeing her pacing back and forth in the safe house and, Will's reaction to finding out that it has been going off, to how long ago, to all that, to going to Cassian and then them having it go off at that moment and Cassian realizing what's going on and readying the troops, as it were. I loved it. It was great. It was, I don't want to say it added a lot to the episode, but it was sort of that good filler, like whether it's in the episode or not doesn't really hurt it. It just pads it out a little bit, fleshes it out a little bit, and filled in gaps in the story in a pleasing way. A lot of times you sort of get that filler stuff and we look back on it and be like, oh, that was just filler. It was, we didn't need that. Whereas this, I don't want to say I would have missed it if it wasn't in the episode, but having it there took nothing away from anything else and was a good way to build towards what would come in the next episode. Randy?
Yeah, for me, it's. I mean, it's not like I'm trying to, flex or anything, but like anxiety isn't something that I regularly deal with. But I just watching this and feeling for her, because that can, I mean, how much of a tense moment can that be, not knowing like if that next knock on that door is the people you're trying to reach or the people trying to kill you. That type of just worry, that type of intense, just like anxiety. It really, that's the only way to really describe it, is just it was a scene that was really well done. I liked how the minute that Cassian knew about the message, he was, I'm off to save the day, and for good reason. But for her to just have to, and we don't even know how really the time frame of how long she truly had to wait, but I can't even imagine just stewing and trying to just everything running through your mind that can or possibly go wrong or go right. That's just extremely difficult, but again, well written, well acted. The music was done well for it too. It really hit on a level where it just made you feel for Clea, and job well done.
Yeah. You get to see just how sort of important Luthen was to Cassian even after choosing, Yavin over him, basically, in the last block. So let's move on. That's it for episode 11. Anything either of you want to add for 11 before we move on?
K2 doing K2 things. I mean, that's basically the way you can him being. I just love that he hasn't changed, even though he's brand new and essentially in terms of what they've done with him. I just loved how the back and forth in the cockpit. I loved how he's just doing his own thing regardless of what he's told to do. It was a nice levity for the episode.
I love that we find out he has his memory. That his memory wasn't
Yeah.
wiped.
Yeah,
Like, that was a big one. You would have think that was a given, but no, he remembers, being at a parade with the Empire or the Emperor there being there, and but yeah, like that shot where he's walking across the bridge leading to the apartment, and they're probably already hundreds, if not thousands, of feet above the ground.
Wouldn't that be 12?
Uh, hmm?
Wouldn't that be in 12?
No, when he knocks the guy off of it, that's in 11, right towards the end. So he's walking towards it, and the guy's like, "Are you one of ours?" And he's like, "No."
no,
And
blap.
just fucking walks
Yeet.
him aside.
It reminded me of the beginning of The Force Unleashed, where Vader's walking across the platforms of Kashyyyk, and you can just chuck stormtroopers out of the way, off the platforms. It reminded me of that.
Oh man, yeah, it was good. It was really good.
All right, so let's move on. Series finale, episode 12. Obviously, you mentioned it. We brought it up there, so let's jump right in. It was the very beginning of the episode. The rescue of Clea and Melshi and Cassian. How are you feeling? Like, another hallway scene in the Disney Plus era. Come on, guys, let's be original. Can we get away from the hallway fights? Like, I say this every Marvel series, I say this every Marvel movie. Like, we don't need to have a hallway fight scene
Unless it works.
I don't care if it works. Pick a new location. Fight in stairwells more often or something. Like, just stop fighting in hallways.
I do believe this is one of the circumstances where you can say, I don't think Tony Gilroy in a million years was going to go out of his way to do a hallway scene. That just happened to be where the story was, and
For sure.
They don't. It's not too old. Like, we really don't see too much of him in the hallway.
Well,
Like,
and I think it was also meant to be claustrophobic. I think that was intentionally done to give you that intense claustrophobic feel of like, how are they going to get out of this? What's going to happen? Just to kind of ramp up the anxiety for anybody watching.
Deidre's ex-protege getting it the way he got it too.
Oh, that was great.
Can I just say, I love nothing more than K2, who is perfectly immune to the blaster bolts they're shooting at him, still using a human shield is like petty to the extreme. I loved it. I loved it so much.
Brings
Watching
new
him just
definition to meatbag.
I was about to say, that's all I had to say is come here, meatbag. And I'd be like, HK47 lives in K2SO.
I loved it. It was great. And you're absolutely right, Sean, when you say that, a lot of the times with these sort of hallway scenes, I made the jokes earlier, but like, you're right. The story was there. It wasn't well, let's start this fight outside and go into a hallway. Daredevil, I'm talking to you. Like, it was where it needed to be for the story. And it fit perfectly in there. Narratively, it was there. And you're right. Most of the fight was hardly even in the hallway, so much as it was sort of, in the apartment, in the doorway to the apartment. But like, everything about it, I loved seeing that. I loved, I loved seeing the impact of the flashbang stun grenade. Actually seeing Cass's vision and hearing be squarely, and still seeing Cass's inherent nature in covering up Clea to protect her. I love that because it was so quintessentially Cassian that even though he is, for all intents and purposes, heartless for the cause, he still has a heart underneath all that. And it comes through there quite prominently, in how he covered, because really to that point, Clay had served her purpose. She'd passed on the information, and had served her purpose to that point. But still, he still had that familiarity to her through Luthen, that he risked himself to protect her, was very important to see the heart behind the armor of Cassian.
My favorite part during that whole sequence is probably when Melshi runs out into the hallway and they're all just fucking pointing at him, and they got the glaring lights there, and he just looks like a complete deer in the headlights. Like, oh shit. And the way he runs back to the room. It was nice that it wasn't too heavy.
We definitely got a bit of that levity mixed in with an otherwise intense hallway battle fight scene. And obviously this leads to, we know Cassian has gone on this mission without permission, because he's Cassian. That's just what he does. So they come in hot back to Yavin, and which I think sound funny because they weren't actively being chased. So, like, were they really coming in that hot? Like, I mean, it's just, yeah, I get it. You didn't have clearance, but, to this point, the only U-Wings that we really know about in the galaxy are Rebellion U-Wings, which,
I think he
how
was
does
just
the
worried about
Empire know
Clea's
that?
head wound, to be frank.
Oh, for
Yeah.
sure. I get that. Like, that's not, it's not his speed that I so much have an issue with, is the rebel response to him coming in hot. Like, they're going full war ready, and
I think it was just erring on the side of caution, just for the sake of what if it's somebody else who stole the U-Wing is coming in. Obviously, they assume it's Cassian, but I think ultimately they're just like, we got to be ready as a just in case that it's something else.
I mean, yeah, I understand that. But when Cassian, or when K2 gives the X-wing pilots the thumbs up, that kind of, I stopped being quite so concerned about that. But
I'm
they
going
come in
to
hot.
tell everybody you kidnapped me.
Another great K2. But that leads us quite nicely into our next sequence, and this is the first time we've seen the rebellion. I don't want to say at large, because we are still missing several prominent members of the rebellion leadership, but we can clearly see that things aren't all bright and rosy in the rebellion headquarters of Yavin 4, with Mon Mothma and Bail being on other sides of the coin. So we got a chance to see some of that sort of infighting in the rebellion that to this point we hadn't quite gotten. We never really saw the main rebels not working for a single purpose, which makes sense. So what were your takeaways from that? The infighting that is the rebels leading everything with Bail and Mon. Were you surprised? Did any of it sort of catch you off guard? What what were you thinking with all of that?
I mean, it doesn't surprise me, just because you're looking at basically the too many chefs in the kitchen sort of thing, where everybody's trying to step up, everybody's trying to lead the way they know how to lead, even though some of them, like Bale and Mon have worked together in the Senate. This is obviously something completely different. But you also have, other other mitigating circumstances where you have Luthen, who has been dealing in lies and subterfuge forever. So there's obviously going to be that distrust there. You have Saw Gerrera, who's an absolute insane person who in pretty much just loves guerrilla warfare. There's so many different types of mentalities there that I'm not surprised there wasn't one thing to really kind of bring them all together. But I think it's this moment. It's this whole idea of Palpatine's creating a Death Star. That's that one thing that's a planet killer, especially that once we get to A New Hope and they blow up Alderaan, that's gonna kind of wake some people up. Be like, we need to work together. But I will say for like this scene itself, and I'm sure you're probably gonna get to it here, so I'll just jump the gun on you. This is the most emotion I've ever seen out of Cassian, in terms of the, for the information, for pulling together, for the rebellion, how much Luthen believed in it. What he said, like his little speech he gave, that was really powerful and really emotional. And like I said, it's the most emotion I've ever seen out of Cassian in the entire series. And I applaud him for it because it was so well done.
Yeah, Sean, what about you? The infighting amongst the rebels. What do you think?
So again, I haven't seen Rogue One in a couple years, but I've read a few posts from people just saying, the Andor series might be the best prequel of any movie ever got. Period. Not Star Wars. Any movie. Period. And in terms of its ability to increase the value of that movie, I guess we will find out in about a week's time. But the one thing I do remember from Rogue One is this exact infighting is happening with the same parties at the table, only this time Merrick and Dodonna are there. And if I remember correctly, the actor who played Merrick died. And Dodonna, I don't know if he passed away, but he also played one of Daenerys's protectors on Game of Thrones, Barristan Selby or whatever. And in Rogue One, I do remember being like, well, Cass just kind of out of nowhere, goes with Jin, and they bring the team, that they were won over. But now we see, why, really, like the real reason why is she just sat through the same bullshit he did a few days prior, So if anyone got it, it's him. And in terms of the Bail and Mon Mothma complex, again, just a wonderful piece of canon, really, because in the Mask of Fear book that I just listened to, that I know our buddy Tommy B's listening to right now, we find out that Bail and Mon Mothma they don't have the same beliefs necessarily, and they definitely don't believe about going about things the same way. And it was nice to see that kind of pop up again in regards to this, because I do think protecting canon is important, to know that things still matter. And I thought they did a wonderful job with it. And Diego Luna, like, I know in season 1 you were a little bit worried we weren't getting enough of him, and I would tend to agree. I still don't think the show's titled properly. It probably shouldn't be titled Andor. But like his performance, guys, like we're talking about and like, to me, I personally, and you can say I'm wrong, flawed, etc. But in my opinion, just because of the amount of time we spend with him and the writing of Tony Gilroy and his brothers, he's become the most fleshed out Star Wars character we have in live action media. And those are words I didn't think I'd say 10 years ago or 9 years ago, however long it's been.
It it definitely allowed us to see a little more into, I don't want to say how things operate in, the Rebellion High Command. Um, it, I don't know. I just, I don't want to say that, the way Bale acted in that scene sort of just like, I don't know, something about, I can't even put my finger on what specifically it is that bugs me about it. But since I watched it, this afternoon, just something about it bugged me. I don't know what specifically it is about it, but I have that feeling like when you watch something or see something that's just like, that doesn't feel right, but you don't know what until, probably 6, 10 a year from now, it'll hit me and I'll be like, that's what it was. That's why I didn't like that. Something else will randomly remind me of it and it'll be like, oh, that's why I didn't like that. Like I have that feeling. I don't know what it is specifically. I can't point to anything and be like, this is what it is, but something about Bale in that scene rubbed me the wrong way. But I don't know what it is. I think part of it, a little bit, might have been, his reaction to finding out Luthen was the one who sent Cassian to rescue Mon from the Senate. Um, like, just, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that seemed to be a revelation to him is maybe what bugged me. Like, I feel like that should have been something that was put together a long time ago for him, since, one of the people he sent was dead. I guess two of the people he sent were dead, and one of them was arrested. Like, I mean, it should be pretty easy to figure out, buddy, you had a problem with your team.
Well, I think that's what he's pissed off about. I don't think it's a revelation that it was Luthen that rescued him. I think it's there was a problem with my team, and the guy that I'm criticizing, the guy that we don't like, who went about things in certain ways that we don't agree with, was the one that got Mothma there. Like, he makes a point of literally saying, duly noted. And I
Yeah.
do think another level of this is he, much like everybody else who has a hard time making the decision that Bix makes, um, like Leia is still in a dead to rights situation if he's found out. And so when Cass makes a move like that, if he gets caught and it all comes down, his daughter could be
He
a
has a lot
victim
to
of
lose.
this. Yeah,
At this
I
point, Leia
too
would
was a bit
still be on
taken.
Coruscant, right?
Coruscant or Alderaan, take your pick. Whether there's something going on in the Senate or not, but like
Because she was still in place as a senator at this point.
yeah, absolutely, 100%. Vader mentions it in A New Hope, so
Yeah, that's what she said when she was being interrogated.
yeah. So there's a lot on the line for him there, obviously. But even I was a little taken back with how dickish he was about it. But when you know sort of remove yourself and think about everything,
I mean,
it
that
makes
might
a
be it.
little bit of sense.
That might be it when you sort of, walk through it and spell it out a bit more clearly. That might be what it is that bugged me about it.
I
Which,
mean,
when you
he
spell it
made
out
it.
like that, kind of makes sense for why his reaction would be that way. Being a man of action like Bale is, having your nose rubbed in the fact you couldn't save, you weren't the one to pull off the mission. Mon would be dead if not for Luthen. Like, you failed, and now we're going to rub your nose in it a little bit here. Maybe that's what it is that I was picking up on that I didn't like. But understandable, I guess, when you spell out those reasons. So maybe that's just what it is for me. But Randy, I cut you off there. You were saying something.
No, you're fine. I was just saying. Also, you got to, he also, in no uncertain terms, he said, we have rules set in place. You broke the rules. You risked us all, basically, without, saying it that way. But and that's, again, I can see why he'd be a bit of a dick if, you pretty much risked everything they've worked for, everything Luthen worked for, everything, even if you look at it, Saw Gerrera is working for. If they're discovered, it's over. And, so I can see why he would be a bit pissy about it. I'm surprised, and some of the others were too. It wasn't just him. So the only one that really kind of went easy was Mon, because she knew Luthen. She's obviously putting that together of, oh shit, he's dead. Where the rest of them just looked at him as someone who was nothing but a liar and a cheat and a thief and all that. Whereas she actually worked with him to help build the rebellion. So I think that's why we're seeing, such a difference in people's attitudes during that scene.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. Now that we've sort of spelled that out a bit.
Can I touch on Dustin's comment here for a second?
Sure.
I think Cass spells this out in season 1, man. Arrogance. They're too busy getting fat and sticking their nose up in the air to realize what's right in front of them. And remind you, it's not Palpatine sending them. They're trying to get this locked down before it gets to Mr. Palpatine.
Before Palpatine sends Vader in to clean up clean up everything.
Yeah.
It's the nature of what they were doing. I don't think it's yes, it's arrogance, definitely, at least a little. But it's also that they were otherwise engaged in other methods to try and find her. As proved when when things did go off the rails, and Partagaz was trying to scramble resources to them. That everyone else was busy dealing with the lie of their own creation, trying to find Clea, who was, Typhoid Mary to everyone else. That, oopsie, your plan backfired, and now the troops you need to actually get her are otherwise engaged trying to find her in other areas that you've sent them to. So, it's a little bit of all of those calamitous reasons. I think that's part of the reason why Partagaz ends up meeting the end he does, which we'll get to shortly. Let's move on. We didn't really get a lot with them, but what we did get, we covered the basic first one. So let's, Mon Mothma, excuse me, Bail Organa and Cass. We don't get to see them together a lot. It's really just that sort of meeting of the High Council where he lays out the information Luthen has provided, and obviously they are, I don't want to say in denial of it, but they are having a hard time believing it, which I sort of chalk up to their own arrogance a little bit, finding it hard to believe that Palpatine outmaneuvered them so much on so many levels that he had secretly been working at a super weapon that they had no knowledge of, and based on the operations that were used as cover, has been working on it for a very long time. They didn't really believe it until future events sort of wear out, and and Vel gets involved and Mothma gets involved, and obviously the events of Rogue One play out that they have no choice. They cannot deny it any longer because now they have verification from multiple sources. So Bail and Cass, we covered the sequence of the council. They really only had one other sequence together, and that was in the house, where Cass hits them with the "you two aren't as different as you think you are." I love that because it did sort of shine a light in Bail's face, like you're not so different, you and he, which I thought was a very good thing for Bail to see, sort of that look in a mirror. I think for me, this is the one time, like, don't get me wrong, Benjamin Bratt is phenomenal. I love him and have for a very long time. I feel only because of events that play out. We see Jimmy in Rogue One, and I kind of feel cheated that we didn't get Jimmy and Cassian. That we didn't get them together as Bale and Cassian. I would have liked that personally, but outside of that, I thought it was great. I loved the chemistry they had, which I wasn't expecting. They played off each other very well, which I really liked. So Cassian and Bale, what'd you think? Did they play well together? Obviously they didn't, but did they play well together in scene? What did you think? How did you feel about it, Randy?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think they could have found anybody better as a replacement or as a recast for Bail Organa than Benjamin Bratt. I also felt like, even though it was a brief scene, you could tell that, the chemistry was there, that that the scene itself worked as a whole. And I like the idea of, it's like, go quietly, do what you need to do. This is where I need you to go. So it's like, it was brief, but it was done well enough that it didn't take away from the episode at all, which is really all you can hope for in these small interactions sometimes. Because sometimes you have a movie or a TV show, and some of these interactions that happen just don't add to it. They take away from an episode, or you could have left it on the cutting room floor and it wouldn't have changed anything. In this instance, it wasn't one of those things. This is something you kind of needed to see, that even after Bale being pissy earlier, that he's had a chance to cool down, and we get to see just that really nice little interaction.
Sean?
Did he mute himself?
Are we having technical difficulties with you here, buddy? Are you still here? I don't know what's going on over there. I haven't seen any messages anywhere or anything like that to tell us he had to back out for a minute. Are you with us? Are you present? Bueller, is this thing on? This isn't awkward at all.
No, not at all.
Because we can't really move on. Well, I mean, we can, I guess, but we definitely, we'll need him here eventually, if for no other reason than he's the one in the control booth.
This is true.
So Sean, mic check, present. Are you here?
I'm sure he'll make his presence known once he's actually back.
Yeah.
Sorry, we had an issue over here, guys.
Okay, that answers that.
I think I'm good.
Okay. Well, we're almost finished, so hopefully we'll finish up before you have to run off again. Bale and Cassian, what'd you think? How'd you feel about that?
It was the right thing to have done. It's bad that my favorite part of the whole thing is K2 being like, hey, the man you don't like is here. Fucking one of the leaders of the Rebel Alliance and the droids saying that. And the other part, I know it's not directly Bale and Cass, and I do like that Bale says, "May the Force be with you."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's vital to start to get that in there. But honestly, it's K2 waking him up from the dream, and what might be his last time, spiritually anyway, seeing his sister. Just the whole scene is very nicely done.
Yeah, it.
Sorry, and the gimme line is you and Luthen would have gone along more than you think.
Yeah, we definitely covered that one a bit when I mentioned it, but yeah, it was great stuff. since we're doing that, Jerry in the chat, Bale and Cassian are meant to not get along. Bale is a different social class, fighting Empire from a relative safe position. Cassian is a soldier on the ground, fighting two totally different. I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. You're absolutely right about all of that. Bale definitely, obviously, is of a higher class. He is the queen consort of Alderaan. People that is often forgotten. That he is a high class. Basically king of Alderaan. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Especially about Cassian. He is boots on the ground. He is a soldier. He is a fighter, and all of the ways that word conveys. So let's move forward. I believe that that's it. We're at the end now. It's the end. This is it. We wrap it up. It's time to talk about the montage at the end. We wrap it up and take all our characters home. We've kind of covered Dedra, so we really don't need to come back to her. We know she is in a place very familiar if you watched season 1, knowing where she is in the same place that Cassian once was, in the prison. Presumably, anyway. I don't know if all Imperial prisons look the same, but we're definitely meant to infer that is the same Imperial prison that Cassian was once in season 1. So the montage. Was there anything in the montage? We'll save the big reveal at the end for the end, because that is the one we've obviously talked most about last night and in previous weeks where that story ends up. But was there anything in the montage that you want to touch, you want to cover specifically?
I think it was just beautifully done. I love Cass's nod to the Force healer. That's a big contrast to the position he was in a year prior. And I love the checking in on Perrin, who most people are like, "Oh my God, he's having an affair." Well, one, his wife, who, believe it or not, he does love, and the Mask of Fear gets into that. They're just not in agreement about certain things. Has been revealed to be, basically a rebel and takes off, and we get the thing from a year later. They have him look. What's the term going back to Mothma kind of throwing him under the bus at the end of season 1, to the driver, is he's back on the sauce, and he looks disheveled. He doesn't look happy. He looks like a broken man, but any other time we see him, he doesn't look that way at all. So I thought that was a nice touch, and we check in with everyone, and I think that's great. And that'll lead me to my final question after this.
Randy, what about you? Is there anything specific in the montage that you want to cover?
I think just in terms of the montage, certain characters we knew, it seemed fitting for him, like Krennic overseeing the construction of the Death Star. That fits. Saw basically standing there looking out over the horizon, kind of, patiently waiting,
seeing the destroyer in the distance.
Yeah, it's like everything kind of fit for where each character was. And of course, other than that, we can get into the big one now.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the only one I want is Mon and Vel at the table. I love that little glimpse of normalcy in the rebellion. You actually got to see Mon with a smile on her face for a second there, and having the conversation with Val. I loved seeing that. It was a nice glimpse of normal in an otherwise not normal thing. So obviously, we've kind of covered a little bit of everybody. We've mentioned most of the people that we see throughout the montage. So let's get to the big one. We actually broke this down last night on the show, where we discussed whether or not we'd even see this. I was the lone no vote, and I knew before I went to bed last night, not having watched the episodes, that I was the one that was wrong. Thank you, Twitter.
Damn you, social media.
I was scrolling through Twitter. Not even, I was using my, I don't know about you guys, but I have different Twitter accounts for different entertainment purposes. Like I have my general entertainment, my sports, my wrestling, and my we don't talk about that account. And I was on my wrestling account because wrestling safe, right? Wrong. I was wrong, entirely wrong. A wrestling account that I follow tweeted out a picture of the ending, called it perfect. I think the tweet was exactly that, the perfect ending. It was a Mr. Perfect joke, and it was the photo of Bix on Mina Rao with the baby in her hands. And I've come very close to throwing my phone a great many times. That was definitely one of them. There was that realization of, if I throw this, it's going to cost me way too much money. I can't actually do that. So yeah, I knew before I went to bed that despite being the only one who said this was not going to happen, knowing I was wrong, Cassian's a daddy, guys. How do we feel about this?
Well, I mean, I threw out this exact scenario on the show, like this exact scenario of how I wanted it to end, and I did not know. I was not spoiled. I'm not used to getting what I want, in terms of endings. And I said that I thought the perfect, hopeful ending to end on would be to find out Bix went back to B2, and that I thought there was a shot last week that insinuated she might be pregnant, and sure enough, she was. I thought it was very. It was just incredibly emotional, and makes an already sad ending to Rogue One even sadder.
I mean, yeah, you're not wrong. Cassie never getting to meet his child, doesn't get any sadder than that.
Never even knowing about it.
Yeah, exactly. But you're right. It was definitely a great ending. They did a really good job of ensuring that she never said gave the name of a child at all, which obviously that's going to let everybody
I wish they
speculate.
would have, just to not have the speculation.
Oh, I know. My wife sat there and texted me. She's like, "Have you finished watching it yet?" She's like, Who do you think what the kid is? Who is it? Someone, but the timelines don't match up." And I'm just like, "You're right. They probably don't," because I'm sure she read some of the same stuff we've read online about who the rumors of who the kid really is. And it's just like, no, we're not going to go there.
Hear me out, guys. Cassian is Broom Boy's granddad.
I'm not seeing the resemblance. I
Hey, you don't know who the mother is.
You know who the baby is? The baby is Cass's son and Bix's son, and that's all you need to know. It's Hope, which builds into A New Hope. It's wonderfully, wonderfully done. It's what I wanted. It's what I got, and it didn't make it any more sad or emotional or moving, but happy sad, kind
Well,
of.
of course. The sun was shining. She was smiling. She was happy. And that's really kind of, in the end, after when you think about everything Bix has been through, that's kind of all you really wanted for her, was to just be able to be happy. And clearly she is.
Thematically, I would have liked that to be a sunrise.
True. I could see that
but
for the. Yep.
Here's the one question that I have coming out of this montage, and this is one that's kind of stuck with me since I saw it. Vel knew, didn't she?
Yeah, I think so, and it's not her place to tell, and I think that's
why she was pushing him towards
very
contacting
much so.
her sooner than later.
That's the
Yeah.
gist I got.
Okay, so I wasn't alone thinking that. Then I guess is the
Mm-mm.
important takeaway here, because I definitely, when you saw that sequence, I was like, okay, that's fine. And I mean, I knew about it at that point, but at that point, I still kind of had that, please be fake, please be fake, please be fake, please be fake, until you actually see it on screen. So, there was still part of me holding out hope that it was fake, but having that thought still in the back of my mind, like, wait, and then you see it, and it's like, oh, Vel knew. Vel knows about the baby and didn't tell you because, well, that, like you said, it's not her place, but she is sort of pushing him to finding out, to get that knowledge and learn about it. And I was not, damn, for her, like knowing that she knew and sort of had the opportunity to interject herself into Cassian's story. Maybe if he'd have known, he wouldn't have, gone on the mission himself, sort of thing. Like, it's just, there's so many what ifs in there.
Yeah,
I
but
love I
how
love
much does
those
he
what ifs.
change? How much does he change if he knows? What decisions doesn't he make because he knows? We don't get the
He probably
Cassian
doesn't go to Scarif.
exactly. We don't get the
I think
Cassian
that's
that
the
we know from Rogue
difference.
One.
Everything after he shoots Tivik in Rogue One, which obviously we'll talk about next week when we watch the movie, but I think everything after that is drastically different if he knows he has something to fight for now. Like, to this point, as important as Cassian was to the rebellion, Cassian didn't have quite that reason to fight beyond his inherent spirit, and I don't think he would have, there's no part of me that believes he would have gone on what they knew was a suicide mission, knowing, he had a child waiting for him. I think it's the
I
big
agree.
difference.
So I gotta ask you guys. This is the question I've been saving. Spinoff / sequel. We know Tony Gilroy has basically ruled out that he would be showrunner again. But often you'll see, someone come back in a producer role where I don't mean just a name either. He could advise someone that he trusts. I'm not saying it's going to happen immediately, but for me, you left so many players on the board, which I did not expect. Mothma was a given. But like Vel is alive. Wilmot's alive. Wilmot's girl's alive. Bix is alive. Although I
Clea?
don't know. I don't think she would have much. Clea is a big one. Right. So like there are pieces without getting into the big heroes, the superheroes, if you will, of Star Wars, where let's not forget that there is 3 years in between A New Hope and Empire. Like there's story to be told there from a Rebel Alliance aspect, and I would hope that if this show has hit the way it has critically and now ratings wise, that it's something that they would explore. But to me, you got to have the right pieces in place, the right creative heads in place, because you would not want to do a follow up to this show that was done at a half or a third of the quality of this one. It would need to be in the spirit of this one, and I think there's a lot more to chew there, and we know how much Star Wars loves to go back to the original trilogy. Well, I think this is a way to do it without being on the nose. Like, it's not like they just up and left from Yavin to Hoth. That's not how it plays out. There's a bunch of stuff that happens in between, and I think there's a lot to tell there. Now, you probably need a new main character, and you could create one just the same way they created Cass. Um, but that, and you need a little bit of star power driving your show. But I think there's more to tell in this story still.
I agree
And
for
I
sure.
don't think it'll happen soon, but I hope it happens.
They got a lot going on their own right now, so yeah, it would be a little while before we get a potential sequel series. But it's that you're definitely right. There is a lot we don't know. There's obviously you could sit there and look at Legends and be like, well, all this is what they have for Legends. But I mean, it's like you could sit there and be like, hey, let's just make Dash Rendar technically have play a big role, and it's just I don't think that's needed for something like this. I think this worked because you had a lot of little players who played a big role, and it worked. Like the chemistry was there, the writing was there, the production value was there. The story was tight, and it was told from very many different points of view that similar to Game of Thrones. So I don't think we need one big superhero for this or super main character or anything. I think if you're going to do it, get a nice good ensemble that works well together, and just make sure the story is tight.
I am willing to go out on a limb and say we will get this, and it will be called Tales of the Rebellion, and it's going to be animated. I think that's the way it's going to happen, because as much as we used to say this is the series we didn't ask for, I'm not asking for a sequel series to this without Tony Gilroy, and I mean that with full invested interest, not just a sort of hands-on, a little bit producer. I'm talking about you know two hands on the wheel, Tony Gilroy, and I don't think we'll get that. I think Tales of the Rebellion is the most likely case for playing out some of these characters that we've seen, like Clea, like Will, and Vel, in how their story goes as we move forward. And you're right, there is a lot of meat on that bone. You're absolutely right when you say we don't just go from Yavin to Hoth. We don't just pick up and go. So there is still a lot of meat there. And I think that is the most likely way we'll see it play out on screen, is Tales of the Rebellion, because I don't think there's not necessarily the interest, but I don't think there's the appetite production wise to do this, because as we learned today, you posted in the group chat the interview with Tony Gilroy. I'm assuming came out today or yesterday, about Kathleen Kennedy and how she was so pro this project and how things played out, in a way that I can't remember if it was you or the tweet. Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. That I can't remember which chat you sent it, or if you sent it to me and not the group now. Here we go. Vanity Fair. Tony Gilroy, our interview with Tony Gilroy about Kathleen Kennedy. She protected the show and protected me. When we started challenging Kathy just kept saying yes. Oh, I'm going to put the first scene in a brothel. Okay. I'm going to have them kill 2 cops. Okay. We want the production designer from Chernobyl. Okay, good idea. She backed our play and got everything that we were doing. We've been through everything, she and I, on this. All the good and all the bad. There's no show without her. For all the shit she takes online, it's just insane. This show exists because she forced it to happen, and what a tough job she has, man. That's Tony Gilroy in a Vanity Fair article, Vanity Fair interview. So, I just don't think there's the appetite for this. Not with all of the shifting sands of Star Wars at the top of the poll. We still don't even know who's in that role in 6 months, in a year.
If there's no appetite for this, it's time to close up shop and shut everything down. Like, it is critically and now ratings wise the biggest success they've had on Disney Plus. Period. End story. And
I think that's
I agree. There's probably not an appetite to spend $300 million on a season of TV. But and this is my argument for doing it. It is insulting. And here's my pushback to Dave Filoni, who apparently is not overly, gung ho for projects like this. And I'll say it right now: if he's not, then he's not the man for the job and should not be hired as even a co-president. One of the knocks on Filoni that I have is he's too animation based, and I about threw up in my mouth when you suggested that we get Tales of the Rebellion and that's how we continue these guys' story, because you will not do it justice. If anything, leave it for a fucking book then, if you're not going to come back and do it on screen. Now, not all Star Wars has to be this way. It just doesn't. We can have The Mandalorian, we can have whatever this Sean Levy and Ryan Reynolds thing is, right? I really
Ryan
don't want
Gosling.
to go further. Sorry. Well, yeah, we'll see if Reynolds creeps in there too. Um, and I hesitate to go any further than that, simply because uh, there's just too many canceled projects, right? That up and down and up and down. So not every project needs to be like this, but it is beyond insulting. Uh, and this show has really changed my perspective on this, is when they go, well, Star Wars is for kids, Star Wars is for kids, Star Wars for kids. Star Wars yeah, the original trilogy was made for kids because it was a different time. But what is wrong with growing up with the kids? So the people that invest the money into your product, the people that get invested interest wise in your product, so you only want them to pay attention to your product for, a few years, and then when they're too old, that's it, fuck them, move on. You need to serve all demographics, not one demographic. And I'm not saying that the next show like this needs to be Andor, but you do need to be hiring people like Tony Gilroy. They don't grow on trees,
Oh, for sure.
to do deep, dramatic Game of Thrones style series like this. Because to me, there is an appetite for it. The question is there an appetite for the other people that are currently running Lucasfilm when Kathleen Kennedy steps away? Star Wars is too animation based. The the stagecraft alone is too, like, it's too much like animation, right? You almost work backwards. And this show didn't do any of that stuff. And we're not going to get a bunch of shows like this. I accept that. But my God, dude, if there isn't another show like this airing in the next half decade, whether it's in a different era, different characters, or a spinoff that features some of these characters and some new created rebels that might be able to be played by, some bigger actors, because let's face it, the people playing Vel and Clea and Wilmot and whoever are not big enough to lead a series. You need some star power in there. If there is not something, whether it's Old Republic, Knights of the Old Republic, in the future, in between the original trilogy, if you do not do something similar to this in the next half a decade, then people deserve to lose jobs. I'm sorry, that's just how I feel.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. I mean, even if they took stuff from Legends, I mean, let's get. I would love to see uh, it something similar. Doesn't I mean I think and I clearly I think we're heading in that direction to some degree, but let's get like a Yuuzhan Vong invasion. Let's because that stuff was graphic as hell, and it was definitely nothing kiddie about that series with the Yuuzhan Vong. I mean, that would can you imagine putting that on screen? You got your horror movie right there with half the shit they did. But forever, obviously, they're still going to try to aim stuff to kids, and that's fine. They need to. We got to have that next generation that's brought up on Star Wars that is going to fall in love with it. It's just obviously they don't have the original trilogy to grow up on like we did, but they have all this other stuff, all the animated stuff they've thrown out there, and some of it's good. Some of it's really good. But yeah, you're right. We need the more adult-centered stories. We need to have that serious, dramatic show that, like Andor was and is, to show that Star Wars does grow up with you versus it's all about the kids. It's all about let's get the Jar Jar Binks toys, or let's get the Ewok toys, or let's get all the different types of droids out there. I mean, it as much as it's about merchandising now. Now it's time to grow up, and this is a good first step towards that.
Yeah,
Johnny, take us home, buddy.
I mean, when I said they don't have the appetite for, I think I meant specifically for this particular story, because I don't think there is sort of that anchor to do the big production that would sort of be necessary to follow this. Not this type of production. I hope that the appetite is strong for this type of production, but I think Andor was at least a little lightning in a bottle. I think if you look back at it, there were a lot of us who said this is not, we didn't ask for this, we don't want this, and a lot of you were bought in fast on season 1 took me a long time to come around, but season 2, I got with the program, and I'm happy to have gotten with the program. So I do think that Andor was a little bit lightning in the bottle, but I definitely think they have to have the appetite for taking the big swing, for sure. Um, whether that's creative people like Tony Gilroy.
Enough of the 8-episode, 30-minute bullshit that doesn't allow you to develop characters properly.
I agree.
I mean, I think there's a place for that, and I don't enjoy that as much, but I think you need to be upfront and clear that that is what we're getting. I think that's an important distinction that to this point they haven't really made. They sell us on this hour show, and then they provide 40 minutes, 35 minutes, 30 minutes. In some cases, there have been a few episodes that clock in under 30 minutes. Let's not do that. That's bullshit. If you're going to do that, tell us you're going to do that. Don't sell us a bill of goods and then, it's actually going to be 40 minutes. Because in this era, that shit don't fly. In the streaming era, that doesn't fly. We don't have commercial breaks. So a 40-minute show isn't taking up an hour block of television. That doesn't, that don't work no more. You could sell us that, it's a 60-minute drama, and then the actual runtime is 40 minutes because of commercials. Because you have to sell ads on TV. You don't have to sell ads on Disney Plus. Okay? Even for the ad tier, don't sell us that bill of goods. We're not buying it. If you're going to say this is a 60-minute drama, you give us 60 minutes, bell to bell. All right? Don't waste my time. And that doesn't include credits either. None of that. Well, credits count. Fuck, die. Do not count. Credits do not count for your runtime. That's bullshit. That's a cop-out. Don't hand me that.
I mean, we've been, not just we, but whether
It's
it's
the royal
critics, content creators, fans have been going, why is it a franchise as valuable as Star Wars, at one point the most valuable franchise that there was, not have an HBO quality type show? So you can be the biggest fan of Mandalorian, of Book of Boba Fett, of Obi-Wan Kenobi, of Ahsoka. None of them are HBO quality shows because it's too surface level. You don't spend enough time with the characters. There's really not layers to the writing. There just isn't. And we got it with this. And again, not everything needs to be this way, because you know what? I still want shows that my 16-year-old is going to enjoy. I want shows my 5-year-old is going to enjoy. But I also want them to, when they're my age, to have things that they can grow into. And for far too long, gentlemen, we have gone without Star Wars directed towards us. And I'm sorry, but I've sunk too much time, value, and love into this franchise to be told just stick to the books.
I agree.
There's a phrase that's sort of been, I don't want to say co-opted by certain portions of the fan base who are, trying to push an agenda, but Star Wars is for everyone. All ages. It's that. Star Wars is for everyone. No agenda, nothing more than to say that exactly what you said. You want to be able to watch the shows with the kids, the teenagers, and us guys who are nearing middle age and crazy. There should be a little something for everyone that isn't just nostalgia, And yeah, capture the kids. That's one market they have done phenomenally well with. It's capturing capturing the children, capturing the young audience. They've done a great job of that. The Ewoks in the 80s enthralled children. Everyone else hated it. Jar Jar Binks. Well, most people hated it, but kids, and Grogu. Don't even get me started on Grogu. Kids and women loved Grogu. That one was a shock to everyone. But
whether Filoni likes it or not, and this will be my last point, and you can take us home. If he's going to be a co-guy in charge or the guy in charge, or anyone else there, whether they like it or not, this is the benchmark that everything is going to get compared to now, for better or for worse. And you don't need to do stuff like this all the time, but like I said, you better be willing to revisit something like this down the road, or else you are literally poisoning your own fan base.
I'm sure it'll get there. Now, Sean, weren't there two glaring errors you wanted to hit on before we go?
The one big one here.
Okay.
We're supposed to be 1 year before the Battle of Yavin.
Yes.
We're not. We're like 2 weeks before the Battle of Yavin. So we don't just skip a year, we skip like 22 months.
Didn't we get a time jump in Rogue One from
No.
once he killed Tivik to once they went after Jin?
No. We'll find out for sure next week, but no, I'm 99.9. The only time
we'll see next week, I guess, for sure. But
one is Jin as a kid, which I think is like 5 years after Revenge of the Sith. To obviously, grown adult Felicity Jones. We're not a year after the Battle of Yavin. I know this has now made people go, well, maybe the end of Rogue One isn't right before A New Hope. It is. It's already confirmed.
You literally see the Tantive 4 escape.
And Leia's outfit, and it's not that she couldn't conveniently be in the exact same thing a year later, but it's
on the
a
same ship in the same spaceport being chased by Darth Vader. It's a little
holding on to the Death Star plans for a year.
Yeah, it's a little misleading, and for a show that wasn't lazy, I thought that was lazy.
That is an oopsie.
But I love the show. I don't want to end on that was lazy. I love the show.
That is an oopsie, but it's a small oopsie. It's not a huge oopsie. It's a little oopsie. But you're right. I mean, we'll see next week for certain. I thought there was a time jump post Tivik, pre Jin, but there may not have been. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie in almost 10 years, so I will err on the side of I'm just misremembering because it's been so long. But I digress. So that's going to do it for us now. That's it. Andor, it's a wrap. It was better than we hoped. Certainly better than I expected. And all around great. I mean, there's a reason Andor now holds three of the top 4 rated episodes pretty much everywhere in Star Wars Disney Plus era television.
Yep, and Andor season 2 is the highest rated Star Wars anything.
I haven't checked. Let me see if I can pull that up really quickly.
That might have changed in the last week, but it was at 98%.
Let me see if I can pull that up really quickly as we start wrapping up here. Andor season 2 Rotten Tomatoes post season today. Today it is a 98.86. So I believe the popcorn meter has dropped since last week. I think when we did it, that was higher than that. I want to say it was like 98.89 last week, or 98.91.
It dropped decimal points.
Like it dropped a few points. It's at
still the
most
highest rated Star Wars anything.
Yeah, so like it's still, it's fantastic numbers. It's great numbers. It is right now the most popular on Rotten Tomatoes, 97%. So like it hit, it stuck. We were afraid it wouldn't stick the landing. It stuck the landing. It was a perfect dismount, perfect landing. It was a 10 from everybody except the East German judge, who gives it a 9 because that's just how they do rankings. But I digress.
Just remember where we were sitting on in the mid-season, and now look where we're at.
Absolutely. It got better. Great. I would like to go back to the me who is watching the first 2 episodes and be like, just Yeah, it's fucking terrible, but don't give up. It will get better. Or at least accept it, and you'll enjoy it when it comes time to watch it in a few years. But I digress. Randy, where can everybody catch you?
Well, currently over on X, it's at Giggity Giles, and weekly, you can find me here. Yeah, that's hopefully hoping soon we'll get the sports back up and running again, but I'm not holding my breath just yet because of, life keeps life, and so it's kind of hard to always get everybody together for that sort of thing.
Life does keep lifing. Well, I guess the answer for you, Sean, is people can catch you here. If you want to contribute in any form or fashion, you can head to patreon.com/fandom empire. If you want to contribute at that level, we will all of you. We appreciate every one of you that do. To our channel sponsors, you guys know who you are. Matt. Let's see, we don't have the graphic up, so I'm trying to remember
Matt,
here.
Ryan, Jesse,
Yes.
Jason.
Yes.
Backtrack Cinema, Jesse Storytime Spectacular, Colleague Nation, Packers suck. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you because
I'm
I
not
thought you said
disagreeing with
Packers
you.
suck.
The
and
Leafs suck more. So
I'm pretty sure that the Titans just won the first overall pick in the draft because they're a great team.
yeah, that's how
Right?
that works.
All right. Seriously, if that's not your thing, if you don't want to do that, we still love you. Head on down just a little bit here under our beautiful faces. Hit that thumbs up button. Drop us a comment. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell, all that stuff to help us out with the algorithm, to get us in more people's faces, and to keep us on your face, on your page, so that you'll always keep track of, yeah, that one kind of got away from me a little bit.
Yep. I was going to say, Johnny wants to be on your face, people. Time to close up shop.
I'm sure there are some viewers that statement might be true of, but that's weeds in depth we don't need to get into. But yeah, like, subscribe, notification bell, all that stuff to help out the algorithm so that we can be on your scrolls, your favorites, your page. You'll never miss our content, and we love and appreciate each and every one of you that does that. So if you want to see us again next week, next Tuesday night, we'll be back. We have the full season 2 review. We've got some guests lined up to come in for that, and I'm sure there will be some other things we talk about, whether that's horror news or wrestling news or whatever. I'm sure we will have other things to talk about next Tuesday night. And right now, tentatively, next Wednesday night, the plan is we'll do our Rogue One watch along, roughly same-ish time, somewhere between 10 and 10:30 start time. And Rogue One next week. That is the plan. You laugh heavily hearing a grown man willingly say giggity. So giggity, giggity, giggity. I hope you're laughing, Jerry. We'll see you next